All right, welcome everybody to our Eat, Live, and Be Healthy webinar series. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening. Today we have Catherine Dowling here with us from Health Connections at MedStar St. Mary's Hospital. Just a few housekeeping things real quick. If you are viewing live, you can post questions at any time in the comment function on Facebook or YouTube, whichever platform you're viewing from. And we'll go through questions at the end if we have some time allowed at the end there to get through them. If you, for some reason, are unable to submit comments on those platforms, you can feel free to email them to us at stmaryspartnership@gmail.com. And I'll be monitoring that throughout the session as well to pull those questions over. If you're viewing a recording of this session, we ask you can just send emails to us as well. So stmaryspartnership@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to get back to you with any answers to those questions. And on that note, I will throw it over to you, Catherine.
All right, so let's get our screen shared here. Okay, so we're not wanting to look at everybody. We're going to want to look at this here. Okay, so hopefully you guys should be seeing a PowerPoint, Healthy Eating Through the Holidays, what we'll be talking about this evening. Just real quick, I have a disclosure statement. As Jackie mentioned, I'm employed by MedStar St. Mary's Hospital at Health Connections. Often when I do talks or presentations, I bring up resources like different companies or advocacy groups or products. And I just wanted to let you guys know that I don't receive any payment from any product or any group that I might happen to mention during this presentation. These are just resources that I think might be helpful to you. And since this is being recorded, I just have a note here that this is being originally presented live as part of the Eat, Live, and Be Healthy webinar series through Healthy St. Mary's Partnership. So just to outline what we'll be talking about this evening, we have some objectives because hopefully you guys learned something tonight after hearing me talk, and then we'll get right to it with the impact of holiday eating habits on weight gain, particularly in the United States. We'll then give some general tips for what to do at special events and holidays, whether you're hosting or if you're attending as a guest, and then some things that you can do before the event and during the event to make healthier choices. We'll then review some food safety guidelines, since we're not just talking about our waste, but we also want to prevent ourselves and our friends and family from getting sick during the holidays. We'll then discuss some specific seasonal considerations, because certain holidays can have specific things go with them, which might not apply during other times of the year. So we want to cover those things as well. And then we'll close with some final thoughts and hopefully have some time for questions at the end. So as I said, I want you guys to learn some things tonight. So our objectives are listed on screen here. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you guys will be able to name at least 3 strategies to make healthier lifestyle choices at special events, list the 4 basic steps of safe food handling, and name at least 1 strategy to make healthier lifestyle choices during a specific holiday. So let's dive right in and discuss the impact of holiday eating habits and why this is something we should be talking about. It's no secret that as a country, the United States has a weight problem. The most recent obesity prevalence data report for the United States was published in February of 2020 by the National Center for Health Statistics, which is a division of the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC. And this data is from 2017 through 2018. And in this report, it showed that 42.4% of adults in the United States were classified as obese, meaning they have a BMI of greater than 30. If we compare that to approximately 20 years ago, the prevalence was only about 30.5%. So we see almost a 12% jump over the course of 2 decades. More concerning is that 9.2% of adults in the United States actually met the criteria for severe obesity, meaning they have a BMI of greater than 40. And again, back 20 years ago, 1999 through 2000, the number was only 4.2%. So we see a jump of about 5% over the course of those 20 years. There are multiple efforts nationally in order to combat obesity in the United States. And there are a couple that I have listed there. One of them are dietary guidelines for Americans, which have actually been in place since 1980. After they were updated in 1990, it was decided that they would be updated every 5 years. So the most recent guidelines came out in 2020. There's also physical activity guidelines for Americans. Those were first released in 2008 and were most recently updated in 2018. Those, however, are both documents that are several pages long. It's quite a bit of work to sift through. So there are some simpler things that we have access to as well. One of them is Choose My Plate, which replaced the traditional food pyramid. And it just is a picture of a plate to show us how we can appropriately portion our different foods, making sure we're representing different food groups at our meals. And also the Let's Move campaign, which was launched to get Americans to be more active during the Obama administration. So there's a couple different things going on to help Americans better manage their weight. There's also quite a bit of research that's going on looking at behaviors of people, especially during different times of the year. So related to the holidays, there's a lot of research that has tried to identify a correlation between weight gain in adults and seasonal periods throughout the year, particularly focusing on the last week of November through the first week of January, or you might think of it as Thanksgiving, all the way through the Christmas season and including New Year's. The interesting thing looking at several of these studies is that the data does not indicate significant weight gain during this 6-week time period. Most of the research only showed an average weight gain in participants of about 1 to 2 pounds. So it doesn't really seem like a whole lot of weight. The issue, though, is in these studies, they didn't just weigh people before and at the end of this time period. Participants were also weighed that following spring and then the following fall, kind of gearing up for that next period of 6 weeks, that next major holiday season. And what was found was that weight gained during that initial 6 weeks in the beginning of the study from November through January was not lost in the following months over the course of that year. So those 1 to 2 pounds stayed on those participants. And this may contribute to slow weight gain over the course of adulthood. You have a couple pounds and then another year goes by and you gain another pound or two, and it's not really a lot all at once. But if we're not focusing on making healthier choices, making healthier lifestyle behaviors, it can actually add up over the course of our adulthood and then contribute to those increasing obesity numbers and statistics. Now, you might be thinking right now, looking at the angry Santa Claus who really wanted his cookies, but instead he got some rice cakes. It's the holidays. I want to eat what I want, when I want it. This is the only time of year I can have certain foods. And I'm not saying we shouldn't enjoy ourselves. In fact, that's going to come up a couple times during this talk tonight. However, we do need to have general healthful habits throughout the rest of the year, making healthy food choices, being more active. And particularly when we are approaching holidays, we should have a positive mindset about food. There are a couple other webinars about mindful eating and intuitive eating that have already taken place as part of the Eat, Live, and Be Healthy series through Healthy St. Mary's Partnership. So if you haven't been able to view those, or if the last time you viewed it was live, I would encourage you to check those out again, because they go over lots of mindful eating tips and positive approaches towards food. Because when we tend to have that mindset of, oh, this is the only time I'm going to have it, I got to have it, or thinking that something is forbidden because it might be too sweet or it might be too much, when you kind of put that label on food, it almost makes it more enticing and actually makes us more likely to overeat. The other thing with holidays is there's often so much else going on, especially connecting with the people that we love and care about. So you'll hear me bring that up several times tonight as well. I'm not going to talk too much about intuitive and mindful eating because it's already been covered. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk more about physical things that you can do in order to make healthier choices through special events and the holidays. So here are some tips for what to do when you're hosting a major event. When you're in the position as host, you have the most prep work, but this also puts you in a position of having the most control of when it takes place, what day and time, and even the menu and all of that. When you are planning a major meal, make sure that you are planning it close to the usual time that you would eat. So if it's a dinner party or celebration, plan the time of when meal will be served around when you would normally eat. If you have it much later than you normally would, you might find yourself snacking or feeling extra hungry leading up to the meal. If you have it earlier than you normally would, then you might find yourself eating more in the evening than you would on a normal day. So try to schedule it at your normal eating time. When you're making your grocery list and planning your menu, try to do some shopping during off hours to avoid crowds and allow time for reading food labels to make healthier choices, things that are higher in fiber, lower in calories, or lower in added sugar. Your shelf-stable items you could probably buy a couple weeks before the event, and then really focus on the ingredients that you need to be fresh by making a trip that same week as your special event or holiday. When you're preparing foods, I would suggest cooking both from the heart and for the heart in order to show people that you care. What this means is using less saturated fats, which are sourced from foods such as butter and cream. Saturated fats are the types of fats that raise our bad cholesterol, which on your lab work that would show the LDL cholesterol, and that contributes to multiple heart health issues and clogged arteries. So we want to try to use less of those in our holiday cooking. If you have produce, try not to hide it under heavy sauces and glazes. This can add unnecessary calories and added sugar, but you're also hiding the taste of your fruits and vegetables, and you really want to try to enhance it and let that shine through. There are ingredients that you might want to look at to swap out to change the flavor or texture of your foods. For example, I mentioned using less butter and cream earlier for flavoring mashed potatoes. Instead, you could use low sodium broth to give it that type of flavor. And then to get some crunch in a casserole or a salad, instead of almonds or fried onions, you could use some chopped nuts. So the example I have right there are some slivered or sliced almonds. If there are any recipes or dishes that you absolutely have to have at certain holidays or family events, definitely continue to include them. If you're going to prepare them as you normally would, and you know that it's a dish that tends to be rich in calories or fat or sugar, then try to have a smaller portion size. Having that smaller portion can also be something that makes it special to you. Like, this is exactly what I'm going to have and enjoy it at this time of year. You can also consider modifying traditional recipes to be a little bit healthier and a little bit lighter in calories. You don't have to swap out and change every single ingredient, but just look at how it's prepared and see if there's maybe one or two swaps that you can make in order to make it a healthier dish without completely changing it from the item that you remember and love. So we have some different cooking substitutions that are up here on screen, some different ideas for things that you can do. And pretty much all of them are trying to decrease the fat in certain foods. The reason for this is that fat per gram has about 9 calories in it, whereas per gram of protein or per gram of carbohydrates, there's only about 4 calories per gram. So fat has twice as many calories per gram as protein or carbohydrates. So that's why generally when we're trying to reduce calories in a dish, we're looking at how we can try to reduce the fat content. So we see in our example of milk, choosing a reduced fat or fat-free milk. Same thing with heavy cream or cream cheese, a lighter version. There's a little bit more variety when you're replacing cheeses, like with cheddar here, using half of the amount of extra sharp and then adding some dry mustard to still have the impact of that flavor. Then we have some more here using a lower fat mayonnaise, adding a little bit of lemon to it to give it some extra flavor. For sour cream, you could use a lighter or fat-free version, but you could also use plain non-fat Greek yogurt if you happen to have that at home. 2 egg whites will do the same job as 1 whole egg, and working as a binder for different types of foods, so you can make that substitution. Nuts contain unsaturated fats, which are healthy and heart healthy for us. Compared to the saturated fats that we would find things in butter or cream, but it's still fat, so it's still going to be higher in calories. So rather than replacing nuts, it's recommended that you just reduce the portion size depending on how much you're adding. And then if you're baking, you can replace up to a half cup of oil with a half cup of a fruit puree. Prunes can be used, but applesauce is also pretty commonly used, and it has a more neutral flavor compared to prunes. However, you would only want to substitute up to a half cup of your oil in baking. And the reason for this is with baking, fat is responsible for the flaky or crumbly or soft texture of different baked goods, depending on whether you're making brownies or cookies or cakes. And the more you replace with a fruit puree, the more you're going to be changing the texture of your final product. So there's a saying that cooking is a science, or no, cooking is an art, but baking is a science. So if you're doing any substitutions with baking, you do want to be a little bit more careful about how you're modifying and changing ingredients. Okay, so I seem to be missing a slide here. Uh-oh. Here we go. I don't know why that happened. Okay. So before the event, as a guest, there are some things that you can do. These can also apply if you're hosting, but if you are, if you're too busy, then, you want to try to make time for these. But as a guest, you want to be worrying about preparing for the event. So think about these things as well. So before the event, you would want to engage in regular exercise as a habit. Before the event, trying to find ways to be more active. So I mentioned the physical activity guidelines for Americans earlier. For moderate intensity exercise, it's recommended that Americans get about 150 active minutes per week. And that can be doing any type of moderate exercise. It could be bicycling, it could be walking, depending on the time of year. Like this time of year, you might be raking leaves or leaf blowing. That counts as exercise. So thinking about regular activities in addition to what you may define as exercise. So trying to make that a regular habit. And then when you know you have a big event coming up that includes food, or when you have the holiday season coming up, trying to increase your exercise habits to hopefully maintain your weight and avoid gaining that 1 to 2 pounds over the holiday season. So thinking about increasing the frequency of your physical activity or how often you're exercising, the intensity or how hard you're working out, and then the length of time that you're actually spending exercising. So do one of those 3 things to help to increase the amount of exercising you're doing before any types of special events or holidays that include a lot of food. And then the night before the event, especially if you're traveling, make sure you get enough sleep. Sleep deprivation tends to increase cravings for foods that are higher in fat and higher in sugar because that gives us more calories. And calories are what gives us energy to keep going. So if you don't get enough sleep the night before, you're more likely to overeat at the event. So get plenty of rest before you go to a party or to a holiday gathering. Don't skip meals that day in anticipation of overeating. That's almost like you're planning to overeat. If the event is going to take place over your lunch hour, then make sure you eat a regular breakfast. If it's going to replace your dinner, then make sure that you eat a regular breakfast and a regular lunch. You want to treat it as a normal day leading up to that event so that when you actually get to mealtime, you feel satisfied and you're not starving and then wanting to eat everything that's on the table. If it's a potluck event, you can volunteer to bring a healthy side dish or dessert as a healthy option that you know will actually be there that you can enjoy, along with everything else that might be available to eat. Okay, so it looks like one of my slides got out of order there. Okay, so during the event, this can apply whether you're the host or the guest. Before the food is served, you want to try to scope out the buffet line ahead of time if possible. You want to be selective with what you put on your plate. And there's actually research to back this up. Cornell University's Food and Brand Lab has done a lot of research on the behavior of people at buffets at restaurants. And people who tend to eat less, they will actually look at all the food that's available and make their decisions on the foods that they really want to have, rather than stopping in front of each item that's available and saying, oh, do I want some of this? Do I want some of that? Because you might put a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then another scoop and then another scoop of each and every item you happen to walk by. if you don't make your choices before you go through the food line. So try to get a look at what's available before you grab your plate and start serving yourself. Another thing you can do is volunteer to let others go before you. This is not only polite to your family and friends, but when food has already been picked over a little bit, it looks a little less appetizing, which doesn't mean it tastes any different, but you're less likely to put more on your plate when it's already been picked over a little bit. When you're actually serving up your food, you want to practice the My Plate method, which comes from Choose My Plate, which I mentioned earlier, that replaced the food pyramid. So what the My Plate looks like is half of your plate should be taken up by produce or fruits and vegetables. And then one corner or 1/4 of your plate, you can put starchy foods such as potatoes or bread or pasta, those types of things. And then the other corner or 1/4 of your plate having a source of protein. So the majority or half of your plate should be taken up by fruits and vegetables or produce. And those foods are naturally low in calories and also high in fiber and water and vitamins and minerals, all things that are very good for us. After you have eaten, wait at least 10 minutes before you go back to get your next serving. And the reason for this is because it allows your stomach to actually have time to send a signal to your brain about how full it actually is. It takes a little bit of time for our bodies to actually process when something has entered our stomach and taking up space. So we want to give our tummy time to talk to our brains about how much is actually in there. If you don't wait, you just kind of go back for seconds. As soon as you finish your first plate, you may load up for more. You might start eating that second plate and then realize you're feeling kind of full, but now you've got this whole plate of food that you feel obligated to finish. So waiting at least 10 minutes will give your body that opportunity to figure out how much more you actually want to eat, or whether or not you're just satisfied and you just want to have that one plate. Okay, when you're eating, take your plate away from the buffet table as well. If you're standing near where the food is, you have the smells, you have the sight of food. It's kind of triggering your senses, wanting you to go back for more. It might be easy to just kind of grab food right off the table as you're standing there. So take your plate and walk away. When you're trying to find a place to go to eat, try to stand instead of just sitting when you're mingling with other guests. Standing and walking around is going to burn more calories than sitting, and it makes it easier for you to move around. If you see somebody that you really want to see, or a family member you haven't talked to in a while and you want to catch up, when you're standing, it's easier to get up and move and be able to see them. If you are offered more food after you've finished and you decided you're satisfied, just politely decline and say no thank you. You can tell the person how much you loved the meal and what your favorite part was, but make sure that they know that you've been taken care of and you're satisfied. You can also just hold a drink like a glass of water, which is calorie-free, to show a visual signal that you're occupied and you're already taken care of. And then when you decide that you are finished eating, a trick that you can do just to cleanse your palate is to eat a mint or chew some gum to kind of refresh yourself, because once you have that fresh feeling in your mouth, it's kind of like when you brush your teeth. After you've done that, you don't want to then go and eat more because you have that clean mouth feeling. So some things that don't revolve around food, like I said, there's probably other things going on. So focus on connecting with the people you care about. If you've been standing there, you finished your plate, you don't have to go back for seconds if you don't want to. Or if you see somebody else that you wanted to talk to, go over and chat with them. Conversation is calorie free. It's one of the things that you can do where you don't have to think about, what am I putting on my plate? That has nothing to do with talking to, your grandparents or your cousins. You're just catching up and seeing what's going on in their lives. If you're hosting, you can make sure that there's other activities available to do as well. You can get out board games or card games. Depending on the time of year, you can provide some outdoor activities for people to do. If there's room to dance, if there's music, you can have that type of fun as well. And then depending on the event, you can take a walk between the main meal and when dessert is served. If you're going to like your parents' house or your grandparents' house and it's in a neighborhood that you haven't been to in years, it's a great opportunity to walk around and see what's still there, see what's changed. If you're visiting a friend's house and maybe you haven't been to their house before, it's a nice opportunity to look at the neighborhood and see where they live. So that's all about general tips and things for what to do. Now we're going to kind of move on to talking about food safety. As I said at the beginning, we're not just talking about watching our waistlines. We also want to make sure that when we're eating food, especially large family gatherings, that the food is being prepared in a safe manner so that we're not accidentally getting anybody sick or even getting ourselves sick. So foodborne illness, or food poisoning, as it may be commonly referred to, occurs when harmful bacteria contaminate food, which would otherwise be safe to consume. There's some symptoms, typical symptoms of foodborne illness listed there, such as abdominal pain, diarrhea, vomiting, usually digestive systems, but it can also include fever and body aches. So none of those things are pleasant. And if you do happen to get foodborne illness, especially, at a certain holiday or special event, you might then have memories of getting ill every time you see certain foods. So we definitely don't want that to happen. We'll be reviewing the 4 basic steps for food safety, and those are clean, separate, cook, and chill. So the first step is the most important step, and that is to keep things clean. So wash your hands and any surfaces you use to prepare your food often. You should wash your hands using warm water and soap for at least 20 seconds, both before and after handling food. Singing happy birthday or reciting the alphabet twice for each of those should help you to get to those 20 seconds. And then in addition to your hands, anything you use to prepare food, you should also wash after you use each item. So that includes your cutting boards, your countertops, and any utensils that you might use. One helpful thing that you can do with cutting boards is you can kind of color code them so that okay, this cutting board is being used for raw meat, this cutting board is being used for produce, this one's being used for cooked food. So then you're not cross-contaminating, which we'll talk about on the next slide. When you are cleaning surfaces like countertops, consider using paper towels because they're disposable. You just wipe it down and then get rid of it. If you're more eco-friendly and you want to use cloth towels, that's okay, but just make sure that you launder them often using the hot cycle. So if there's any bacteria that's lingering on the towels, that can be killed in your washing machine. While produce is ready to eat, you do want to rinse all of it under running water before consuming, even the ones that have skins or rinds that you don't typically eat. So, an apple, you can eat the skin on that, but an orange or a banana, usually we just peel it and throw it away. The reason why you want to wash your produce, even if you're not eating the skin, is because there might be things outside on the skin that can then contaminate food as you're peeling or cutting into it. Particularly if you're cutting into it, if there's any bacteria or dirt on the outside, if you get your knife and you slice through the skin, your knife is then carrying all of that dirt or all that bacteria down into the fruit and then contaminating it. So you just want to make sure you wash all your produce before you eat that. And then if you're getting any cans out of your pantry, just wipe down the lids before opening. Depending on how long they were in there, they might have some dust or they might have other bacteria on there. And when you're opening the can, there is a chance that some of that can get into the food that's inside the can. The next step is to separate your foods, particularly anything that's raw and ready to eat. So as I mentioned, using separate cutting boards can help you keep things apart. You never want to place cooked meat on a plate that previously held raw meat unless that plate has been washed in between the time the food was raw and when it was cooked. So the example that I always like to use here is think of, an outdoor cookout. You bring some steaks out to the grill. They were marinating, so they're sitting there raw on the plate. So you pick them up, you place them on the grill, you flip them over, they're cooked, and then you just place them right back onto that plate where they were raw and where they had been marinating. If there was any bacteria that had been in the meat, you probably killed it off when you grilled it, but then you put it right back onto the plate where there were those raw meat juices that were left behind. So then you recontaminated the food that you cooked. So make sure that you always use a clean plate for placing cooked food on. When you're thawing meat before preparing, you want to use the bottom shelf of your refrigerator so that juices don't drip onto other foods. Especially, if you happen to put something on a higher shelf, as you're pulling it out, you risk something's dripping because you can't exactly see what's on the plate if anything has melted. So the bottom shelf is the safest place to put thawing meat. And then don't reuse free marinades that you used on raw foods unless you first brought it to a boil. So if you have any marinade left over from raw food, boil it to kill any bacteria, and then you can reuse it to brush on or baste cooked meats or cooking meats in order to give it extra flavor. Here we go. So the next step is actually to cook your food, and you want to make sure that food reaches the right safe minimum temperature to kill any bacteria that might be present. The best way to tell whether food has reached that safe temperature is to use a food thermometer. Food often changes in color and texture as it's cooking. Chicken goes from pink to white, beef goes from dark red to brown. But you don't always know whether or not it's reached the right temperature all the way to the center or the thickest part of meat. So using a food thermometer is the best way to ensure that food is safe to eat. When you are serving food, especially for a buffet, when everything's being laid out, hot food should be held at 140 degrees or warmer, and cold food should be held at 40 degrees or colder. And the reason for this is between 40 and 140 degrees is known as the temperature danger zone, or when bacteria can most proliferate in food. So you want to make sure you keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold. In order to do that, you can use things like chafing dishes, warming trays to keep foods hot, or if you're trying to keep them cold, to set them in ice. But we have some cooking temperatures listed here. You can find this information on foodsafety.gov. They have different charts for what the safe minimum internal temperature is for different foods. And these temperatures are set by what temperature is going to kill bacteria that most commonly can be found in different types of meats. So people often associate the bacteria Salmonella with chicken, which is a type of poultry. Salmonella happens to be one of the most heat-resistant bacteria out there, so that's why it has the safest that's why it has the highest minimum internal temperature. Leftovers are also up there as being the highest because often there's mixed foods, there can be different things in there. So just as a safeguard, it also has the highest temperature listed there. You will also notice that there's differences in red meats, whether it's ground or a whole cut. Ground has a higher temperature because when it's being ground up, that is an opportunity for it to be exposed to potentially hazardous bacteria. So it has a higher cooking temperature compared to whole cuts of meat. But again, you can see all of these recommended safe internal temperatures in charts on foodsafety.gov. The last step for food safety is chill. And you may be wondering, well, why do I need to worry about this after I've cooked my food and killed all the bacteria? And again, this is about keeping food at a safe temperature. So you want to refrigerate your leftovers both promptly and safely. Any food that has been left out for longer than 2 hours at room temperature, you want to discard. Or discard it after 1 hour if the temperature is above 90 degrees. So thinking of an outdoor event in that case. Food should be stored in shallow containers so that it cools off faster in the refrigerator. And then just for taste and quality, you want to try to use most cooked leftovers within 3 to 4 days. There is a program you can find on foodsafety.gov called Food Keeper. It's also an app that you can download both on Apple devices and Android, where you can look up different foods and you can see how many days they can be considered fresh in the refrigerator, or how many months they would be considered fresh if kept in the freezer. So that's a good tool to use if you have some leftover meat or leftover produce. And then we're thinking about the appropriate temperature in your refrigerator or freezer. If you don't have a thermometer installed in those appliances, then you want to purchase an appliance thermometer and place it in there. Your refrigerator should be at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and your freezer should be at or below 0 degrees Fahrenheit in order to ensure food safety. So now that we've talked all about that, we'll get back to talking about holidays, specifically going in order with what's coming up quickly and then kind of going through the rest of the year. So Halloween is only about 10 days away. I'm sure many of you watching already have your Halloween candy purchased. It might be sitting in your pantry. You may have needed to convince family members not to start eating the candy, or you might have to convince yourself. And if you haven't bought it yet, you still have plenty of time. If you haven't purchased candy yet, then you're at an advantage to have these tips that I have listed right here. And the first one is to consider your neighborhood. If you usually get a lot of trick-or-treaters, then definitely make sure you have plenty of candy to hand out. If you usually don't get that many children visiting your home, then don't buy a mega-sized bag, because then come November 1st, you're more likely to have a lot of candy left over that you got to figure out what you're going to do with. Another thing you can do is to purchase candy to give away that you don't really like to eat yourself. So if lollipops are not your thing, feel free to give those away. If you're not a fan of chocolate, then buy chocolate to give away to kids. If you do have children who are going trick-or-treating, I just have a couple food safety tips listed here. Depending on the age of your kids, they may be able to do this step themselves. But if you have younger children, after you've gone through all the neighborhoods and your kids want to go through their spoils and figure out all the things that they got, go through it with them and discard any candy that happens to pop open or was already unwrapped, or anything that was not pre-packaged. Because if it's not pre-packaged from a food company, like homemade cookies or something, while it is sweet to give those away, whoever might be receiving them can't know all of the ingredients that are in those foods. So often those items end up getting tossed. In order to prevent your kid from eating half or their entire bag of Halloween candy on Halloween, immediately let them have a couple pieces of candy, especially as they go through everything they have, and then try to spread it over several days or over a couple of weeks through different ways. If you pack your kids' lunch, you can certainly put a piece of candy in their lunch, show them, hey, have something sweet while you're at school. When they come home from school, if they had a good day, if they do their chores, let them have some pieces. And that actually can provide a healthier mindset about foods. As I said before, when something is forbidden or, I can't really have too much of that, it makes it more enticing. So if you normalize having a piece of candy every now and then, your kids are more likely to have a healthy relationship with those types of foods. And then finally, remember who the candy belongs to. I know that it's trendy or viral to pretend that you've eaten your kids' candy and then videotape their reactions. That's just mean. It's not your candy. If you, have money and have a car, you can go to the store and buy your own if you really want it. But for your kids, they may not have a job. Most children don't unless they're teenagers. They certainly can't drive until they're much older. So this is really, their way to get some sweets. So let them have it, but just let them have, a couple pieces every day rather than all of it all at once. Another thing related to Halloween that you may know about or you may not know about that's not necessarily related to handing out food is called the Teal Pumpkin Project. You can find more information about this on foodallergy.org, but this type of thing promotes food safety, inclusion, and fun for trick-or-treaters who have food allergies. 1 in 13 children in the United States live with a food allergy, so it's very likely that there's a kid in your neighborhood who deals with food allergies. But there's also children who may have intolerances or other conditions that affect what they might eat. So think of lactose intolerance or celiac disease. There's even less common things called eosinophilic esophagitis, or you could have kids who require tube feeding. So all kinds of things going on that you might not necessarily know about, but makes a holiday like Halloween a little trickier for them to enjoy. So with the Teal Pumpkin Project, what you can do is, in addition to or in place of candy as a substitute, You can provide non-food treats and trinkets in a separate bowl or container for trick-or-treaters to choose items from. And the nice thing about this is that you can't eat something that's not food. So come November 1st, if you have a bunch of spider rings left over or a bunch of miniature slinkies or pencils, you can just save those items to give away again next year. You don't have to worry about having it in your house. In order to show people that you have non-food items to give away, this is where the teal pumpkin comes in. You can get a pumpkin and you can paint it, or hopefully you can see on my screen, I'm holding one up right now. You can often buy foam ones from craft stores. But what you would want to do with your teal pumpkin is place it somewhere visible from the street. So either on your front porch or near the end of your driveway, and that'll send a signal to families who know about the Teal Pumpkin Project that you have other goodies that you're giving away besides candy. You can go on foodallergy.org to get some ideas for non-food treats, but I have some listed here. So things like glow sticks, I mentioned jewelry like spider rings, noisemakers, bouncy balls, even some school supplies, stamps, things that are going to be still fun for kids to use. You can often find lots of these items at dollar stores or party stores, and even some places will allow you to order them online in bulk. Halloween's pretty close though, so I would say if you are going to do this, you probably want to go to a physical store and just buy it in person. So after Halloween, we then have Thanksgiving, which starts that 6-week period that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, that kind of major holiday season that's centered around food. And Thanksgiving is probably the most food-centric holiday out of all of them. So on Thanksgiving, kind of applying some of those general tips we talked about earlier, you really want to savor any seasonal dishes that you would not normally have at any other time of the year. So if Thanksgiving is literally the only time of year that you're going to have green bean casserole or pumpkin pie, then definitely give yourself a serving on your plate. But just remember the My Plate method when you're portioning things out. If you're traveling to a relative's house with food, make sure that you pack your food in insulated containers for food safety. As I mentioned before, try to keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold. If you happen to be hosting Thanksgiving, make sure that you plan ahead for thawing your turkey in the refrigerator, because turkeys can take up quite a bit of space. You want to allocate about 24 hours for every 4 to 5 pounds of the whole bird. So it's quite a bit if you have a large family or a large turkey that you're defrosting. Often on the side of the package, it will give some recommendations for how long to thaw your bird. So if you forget what I'm telling you right here, usually on the side of your turkey packaging, it'll tell you how long to thaw it for, depending on how much it weighs. When you're cooking your turkey, you want to check in 3 different places to check that it has reached a safe minimum internal temperature for eating. You want to check the thickest part of the breast, and then the innermost part of the thigh and the innermost part of the wing. Remembering to avoid touching the bone with your thermometer, because the bones tend to get really hot and can give you a false reading that has reached temperature if you're touching bone instead of meat. Again, since turkey is poultry, the minimum internal temperature you would want it to reach in those 3 places is 165 degrees Fahrenheit. If you go to foodsafety.gov and check those temperature charts that I mentioned earlier for meat and food preparation, I believe towards the bottom of the page, it has separate charts for turkey and Thanksgiving. And those charts actually show you, for how many pounds of whole bird versus turkey breast, where it doesn't have the legs and wings on it, how long it would need to thaw in the refrigerator. And it also has information for how long you would need to cook your bird, depending on the size and whether it's stuffed or unstuffed. So good information to check on foodsafety.gov if you want to know how long you should be cooking your turkey for. Since I mentioned stuffing, from a food safety standpoint, you should probably consider cooking your stuffing as dressing, which would be having it in a separate casserole dish instead of stuffing it inside your bird. And the reason for this is that this guarantees uniform doneness of both your starchy stuffing and your turkey. When you stuff the cavity, it takes longer for the turkey to heat up. And now you have things in the center that also needs to reach that minimum internal temperature of 165 degrees, because you have juices from the turkey or poultry that are kind of entering the stuffing, and it can give it more flavor. If it doesn't reach that minimum internal temperature and there is bacteria present, then your risk of having bacteria proliferate in the stuffing significantly increases. So just to make sure everything is cooked properly, my advice would be to separate it. If you traditionally stuff your turkey and you check your temperatures and you know everything always reaches 165 degrees, then you can certainly continue to do that. And if you're like me and you only cook turkey at Thanksgiving, a whole turkey, and you never do it any other time of the year, you might forget how to do it for the months leading up to Thanksgiving. So as a dietitian, I have food science textbooks at home that I always reference. For people who don't happen to have textbooks, the next best thing I have listed up here, but just the Butterball Turkey Hotline, which has operated since 1981, so about 40 years, being available for people to ask questions all about cooking turkeys. Both their main phone line and their text chat number I have listed up there. And they're even modern. If you happen to have an Amazon Alexa in your house, you can use it to call and contact them to ask questions about how to prepare your turkey for Thanksgiving or for Christmas if you're having it at Christmas time too. If you happen to be bilingual or if you speak Spanish, they do have operators on their lines that know how to speak Spanish. So they have availability for someone who does not speak English as their first language in order to help with turkey cooking as well. So after Thanksgiving, we have Christmas. So that's the big one where there's a lot of candy, a lot of baking and celebrating going on. If you're having a lot of treats available, try to keep them in less accessible places rather than having an open candy dish out on the table. Maybe put it in a container that has a lid on it on the counter, so it's a little bit out of the way and sees less traffic going through your house. If baking is a special tradition for you and your family, definitely continue to do so. As I said earlier, I'm not trying to take anything away from you that's traditional. We just want to try to find healthier ways to do it. So if you're going to be doing a lot of baking, making candies and treats with your family, keep some for your family to enjoy, but consider giving some of it away as some homemade gifts to show family and friends that you care. If you do receive any food gifts over the holidays, share them with your family, share them with your friends, enjoy them with the people that you care about. That's what the holidays are all about. If you do happen to have any family members or friends who have chronic conditions, that means they have to make certain dietary choices, or they're just generally trying to be healthier around the holidays. Christmas can be particularly difficult because it's got the big traditional meal, sometimes Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and then all of the baking and sweets and all of that going on. So try to be considerate of other family members that are trying to be healthier during the season. If you're making food gifts to give away, maybe consider getting something else for someone who's trying to make healthy choices. So I combined St. Patrick's Day with New Year's here because both of those holidays tend to be a little bit heavy on the alcohol. If you are going to be drinking on either of those holidays, make sure that you designate a driver who won't be drinking so that you have a safe ride home from any events that you might be attending. Water will actually satisfy your thirst better than alcohol. So drink some water before you even have your first beverage, or if there's high calorie beverages available, some leftover eggnog from Christmas you're serving on New Year's, have some water before you have a sip of that. And then drink water between refills as well, so that you have something sitting in your stomach. You can kind of process and digest and figure out, okay, do I want more or am I feeling satisfied? Consider drinking seltzer in place of alcohol as well if you don't want to be drinking. There is no obligation to drink if you don't want to. And in fact, you could designate yourself as the driver if you have any friends who might be enjoying alcohol on New Year's or St. Patrick's Day. So we're going to kind of go in between here with Valentine's Day, since that can be a candy-centric holiday. So thinking about ways to satisfy your sweet tooth without the candy. And there's you could probably call them corny ideas here, but I think they're kind of cute. Writing hi cutie on a clementine, because those are sometimes referred to as cuties, or I'm bananas for you on a banana and packing that in your significant other's lunch, making lunch for them as they head out to work that day, or putting it with your kids' lunches as you're packing them. Just a kind of a silly and cute way to show them that you care. To go with the white and red color scheme for Valentine's Day, you could also do strawberries with a little bit of cream. That's still a very healthy choice to have, and it's very sweet and satisfying. There's also lots of traditional non-food gifts that you can give on Valentine's Day, like flowers. You could go out to see a movie, or maybe rent or stream a movie that you really wanted to see. There are subscriptions to date nights in a box that you can purchase now and have sent to your home, so you don't even have to leave your house. If you're not comfortable, you can just do something together at home. Mr. Rogers used to always say there are many ways to say I love you, so there's many other things you can do that are not related to food to show someone that you care on Valentine's Day. Restaurants tend to be pretty overbooked on holidays like Valentine's Day and a couple other ones that I'll mention in a few slides here. So consider making your date night meal at home in order to avoid crowds. Time spent together is the most valuable gift. So if there's something that you really wanted to try, or if you want to do some kitchen experiments, that can be your date night for Valentine's Day. That can be something special that you decide to do together, rather than going out and having to compete for a table with everybody else who may be dining out on Valentine's Day. Next, I kind of lumped in birthdays with Mother's Day and Father's Day because we're almost through the entire course of the year. So I'm sure somebody's had a birthday by this point in time. So when it's your special day, go ahead and enjoy a treat. Again, having that positive mindset, I can have this, instead of trying to make something seem forbidden and then overeating. And sharing with others who are there to celebrate you. Again, spending time with those friends and family members who are most important to you. Like with Valentine's Day, Mother's Day and Father's Day tend to be pretty overbooked when it comes to dining out. So you could ask your family members or whoever's in your household to make a special meal for you as part of your gift, to make your favorite foods. You could even make it an activity to make your meal together as a family and really spend some quality time together. And then just to wrap up, we'll cover the summer. So summer usually starts with Memorial Day, and then halfway through there's Independence Day or 4th of July, and then ends with Labor Day, which is when fall usually starts with school getting back up again. With these types of holidays, they're usually outdoors. The weather tends to be very hot. So the most important thing here is to remember those food safety guidelines I mentioned before. Clean, separate, cook, and chill. Do not reuse any marinades for ready-to-eat food or cooked food that you used for raw food. That example of the grill that I mentioned earlier, not placing cooked meat back on a plate where raw meat rested, and then remembering to pack up all leftover food after it's been left out to serve for 2 hours or 1 hour if it's a particularly hot day and the temperature is over 90 degrees. One thing that you can do is to keep dessert and your main meal separate so you don't have things sitting outside, maybe not being eaten if everyone's going for the main course, or it could be melting depending on how hot it is. So try to keep dessert in a temperature controlled environment. And then after you bring in your main meal food, then bring out those extra goodies for people to enjoy. There you go. So just to close, some final thoughts here. I've mentioned this a few times, but just to really bring it home, holidays are about the people that you care for, and enjoying food with them is one way to show you love and you care, but there are many other ways to show that. So hopefully you've gotten some ideas here for how to show people how you care and how to make healthier choices. Practice mindfulness to enjoy your food, not to overeat. So again, as part of the Eat, Live, and Be Healthy webinar series, there have already been some talks on intuitive eating and mindful eating. So some of the tips that I have listed here are mentioned in those presentations, but really play to your senses. Notice the colors, textures, scents, and tastes of your food so you can really enjoy it and be satisfied. You can put your fork down between bites to savor each bite that you do take, and then eat until you feel satisfied, not stuffed. One of the presentations I recall goes over something called a hunger fullness scale. Well, it rates how full you are on a scale of 0 to 10. So that's something you can practice in order to see, do I feel satisfied, or do I feel like I can eat a little bit more? Because you definitely do not want to eat to the point where you're uncomfortable. And in general, try to practice day-to-day good health habits, making good food choices, trying to be physically active all year round. As I mentioned way at the beginning, holiday weight gain, especially during that 6-week period between Thanksgiving and New Year's, tends to only be about 1 to 2 pounds. But by adopting healthy habits through the entire year, you can maintain your weight through that period or very easily lose that 1 to 2 pounds so that you're not having that slow weight gain over adulthood that I mentioned before. So that's all I have to say. I want to thank you guys for your time. I always like to put a little comic at the end of my presentations just to add some humor here. So if you can't read it, it's a little small. It says, on Thanksgiving, the 4 basic food groups are more, a little more, a lot more, and too much. So just to put some humor in there, but remember mindful eating habits and remember your plate method when you are portioning out your foods. So I think we do have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to stop sharing here and get back to the screen. So do we have any questions?
All right. So you can submit those questions on the comment function on YouTube and Facebook. We did have one come throughout, so I'll throw it up onto the screen. So Jack asked, what is the most common food that is undercooked and causes food poisoning? So that came through during that kind of food safety portion.
Yeah, so that one is it's going to be a tie between chicken and ground meat. Again, as I mentioned before, salmonella tends to be a pretty common contaminant in chicken, and that's one of the most heat-resistant bacteria out there, so it can be particularly difficult to kill. So if you don't heat your foods to a high enough temperature, if the bacteria is present, then that can cause foodborne illness. And then with ground foods in particular, like think of burgers, you may want it to be well done, or you might want it to be a little bit more pink on the inside. When it's pinker, it tends to be a little bit less done. So if there was any contamination in there, there is a more likely chance that that could be there. Again, especially if you're ordering, a burger out at a food service establishment, they should be checking temperatures. They should have safe food practices. In that case, that would be more related to if at the actual meat processing plant, there was a contamination event that happened when the meat was being ground up.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Jack. A question that came to my mind as you were talking, as we wait to see if any more kind of come in through those platforms. You gave a lot of really great resources for kind of substitutions that you can make or changes that you can make to kind of common or family recipes that people might have. Do you have a good website that people can go to with kind of healthy versions of common recipes? I know I tend to go straight to Pinterest or Google to just look them up. But is there any great resources out there that people can go to?
So there was one that I always used to go to, but I'm not sure it's online anymore, so I'd have to check. It was called sparkrecipes.com, which was a derivative of Spark People, and that was like an online food journal that you could keep. But I think they were updating the website and trying to reframe it a bit. I haven't checked it in a while, so I don't know if they still have the recipes online. You can also go, I'm trying to think of it now. There is a diabetes dietitians practice group that I'm a part of that will often have recipes on there that you can check. So checking like the American Heart Association or American Diabetes Association, I'm sure they have some recipes on there. But I mean, Pinterest and Google are still good resources to check to kind of get a wide search bubble to look for different things to try.
Perfect. Thank you. Doesn't look like we have any other questions coming through. If anybody does have questions that pop up afterwards, or again, you're reviewing the recording, feel free to submit them to us via email. And we'd be happy to reach out to Catherine to kind of get those responses out to you. Catherine, thank you so much for dedicating some time to us tonight and joining us for this webinar series. We really appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you. It was fun.
Great. Thanks. And thanks, everyone. We hope you all have a wonderful evening.